Started? Oh, there we go. Perfect. Well, thank you for being here today. It's the 21st day of our legislative session. It's been busy. We did have some bills that were up in committee this week that we're grateful we've made progress on. One of them had to do with the banning of critical race theory in our schools, in our K-12 system, and also at the collegiate level. We're grateful to see those move forward and go through the process of getting a hearing to make sure that we're not having racism or divisive policies and agendas taught to our students. Then also, we had a bill move forward. I think it's, what do you want me to do? Oh, okay. Would you all mute your phones, please? I think that would be helpful to not get feedback in the room. And then we'll go to the questions here in a little bit. Another bill that we were glad to see had support with the legislature had to do with protecting vaccine exemptions. That had to do with making sure that in the state of South Dakota that people had exemptions honored for their religious freedoms, medical, and immunity. The immunity provision would be every 6 months is when that immunity level would be checked, and those are moving forward as well. We do have 21 bills that have been signed into law so far this legislative session. 19 of those were this week. One I do want you to be aware of that I did veto, and it had to do with our but our lottery system. Typically, when someone wins the lottery in the state of South Dakota and they own back child support, we collect that child support out of those winnings if it's above $100. The bill that was in front of the legislature had to do with raising that threshold to $600. I vetoed that bill on the basis that there was $12,000 worth of child support payments that were made to families based on that collection effort by the system, the lottery system, and we're grateful that those families had the opportunity to collect that back child support. So sending that back to the legislature, hopeful that they will agree with me and we can continue to keep those child support payments going out to those families. With that, I'll open it up to questions you have.
Yes, ma'am. Austin Goss, Dakota News Now. Earlier this week, former President Trump endorsed you for re-election for governor here in 2022. Just wanted to see your thoughts on that, what it means to you and what it means to your campaign.
Well, I'm grateful for President Trump's support in my re-election to be the governor of South Dakota. He and I worked closely on tax reform when I was in Congress, spent about 2 years working on that bill, and also a lot of his policies were good for the families of South Dakota. They made sure that our taxes stayed low, our regulations were low, that agriculture could do very well and our other industries could grow, and he helped me get fireworks back at Mount Rushmore. So we're hopeful that we can soon get through the court case on that and see under the Biden administration them restored again.
Governor, in the critical race theory bill, it talks about certain divisive topics, and one of the little subsections says there shouldn't be any topic that a student induces anguish in a student. And yet, when we learn about like wounded knee, shouldn't a student feel a little bit of anguish about that terrible chapter in American history?
Absolutely. Wounded Knee was horrific, and our students should absolutely learn about the atrocities that happened there. In fact, I've been working with that tribe for years to try to get a true memorial built there that attracts people from around the world to come to Wounded Knee and learn about the terrible things that have happened there. So I'm hopeful at some point the tribe will come to the table and work with me to do that, because I think that's something the state could partner with them on.
Just along those lines.
Ariel on the phone?
Ariel, we're going to go in the room to Stephen, then we'll come to you. And again, Stephen, I'm so good to you.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Hopefully you'll bear with me with this question.
Okay.
So the bill that passed committee yesterday applying to K-12 schools.
Are you talking about critical race theory banning bill?
Protecting political indoctrination. So, I'm just looking at the bill now, and it says a public school may not allow any curricular instruction, standards, or training that promotes a divisive concept. And then it lists one of the divisive concepts are that any race, color, religion, includes a religion, is inherently superior or inferior.
Right.
So, would that apply to, say, Fellowship of Christian Athletes wants to have take a club in a public school district? How would that not apply to like a Bible study like Fellowship of Christian Athletes?
This bill is specifically referencing curriculum and content in the school district that is taught by the school, the teachers, the administration. And what it's saying is that there can't be an agenda tied to that curriculum that's in the classroom that would tell one student that another race, sex, or color is better than them. And also that they're not responsible for past actions of individuals or their ancestors. Learn about history, recognize the flaws and the mistakes, but also do better in the future.
Governor, a quick follow-up.
We're going to go to
ahead.
Ariel
Sorry.
on the phone, and then we'll come back to the room.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have a question about the workforce housing bill. So there's kind of a lower limit on it. Developers and municipalities can't get funding for subsidized level housing, and that's my understanding is that's because there's already programs for that. But looking at the bill and speaking with lawmakers, it appears there's no upper limit on these kinds of projects. So it doesn't say, for example, the housing needs to be under market rent. You know, you take a look at the average market for the municipality. Okay, it needs to be this amount underneath that average. So can you explain why you decided to pitch a bill that lets any project apply rather than, you know, limit it to that above subsidized but still considered affordable, you know, for people who still struggle to afford even though they're poor?
Well,
I'm sorry, even though they're not poor.
Okay, so I think you're confused a little bit on what this housing bill is. And when we put together this package of potentially working with communities on housing, we wanted to work on infrastructure. We're not building houses with these dollars. We're partnering with communities to build and develop out lots with the infrastructure that's necessary to have them be developed into the future. And one of the reasons you heard in my budget address and in my State of the State that I made it a grant program was because I wanted every single community to qualify. This is not Section 8 housing, it's not federal housing, and it's not subsidized housing. What we want to do is to partner with grants with local communities and developers to go into towns of all sizes of South Dakota to make sure they have an opportunity to do that kind of development to potentially have housing to meet their career needs for those career individuals that want to move to their towns and get a house that they can afford and live in and put their kids in the schools. I know that I've had a lot of meetings on this issue. Legislators saw a desire for loans, and so we do have a compromise piece of legislation. The loan proposal came from Senator Crabtree, Senator Schoenbeck, and also Roger Chase in the House. My concern with doing loans is that typically you only see loans and the ability to repay them in this space in large communities. So I'm concerned that towns of 500 people, they simply, by the time they commit the land to a project, they don't have the financial ability to pay back a loan. So what we ended up on was a proposal that made it through Senate committee that's a combination of both, making sure that there was $100 million available for grants so that those smaller communities would have an opportunity to do this kind of development, and then also $100 million committed to loans that would go through the Housing Opportunity Fund that we have to change some statute to make work, but then to also allow that to be available for a long period of time for those communities that want to pursue a loan instead of a grant. So it's a program that's been done with a lot of communication. I would say Crabtree, Schoenbeck, and Roger Chase have been working with us to make some changes along the way. Let's go to Joe.
I understand that it's used for the infrastructure, right? The roads,
correct.
But the plumbing. But what I'm saying is, it's going to be a municipality and developer that applies together.
Well,
but
community
there's no requirement that they then use that they use that land for a project that is affordable. And by affordable, I do not mean subsidized, which is something that is, you know, middle of the road for, again, people who are working. They're not poor, but they struggle to afford market rent.
So you're talking about specifically the projects of what happens after the development on the lots occur, and we are not here to dictate to those communities what they put on those lots, but those lots are developed for career housing. It is to meet workforce needs, and one of the things that we are requiring as the grant program is a workforce housing study first. So we're making sure that they're building the appropriate housing for that community and the needs that they have to recruit those workers to fill the jobs in that town. Let's go to Chris. Did you have a question? Yes. Sure.
It seemed as if, I may be got this wrong, it seemed as if that the bill had actually, it seemed as if the bill had actually written out the curricular piece, that it's not going to touch what's the content and conduct of a classroom. But you seem to suggest that it is, so do I have it wrong?
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry. There was a couple of amendments in committee that
Yes.
took out action civics.
And there was an amendment that also specifically says this has nothing to do with what a teacher is teaching.
It has to do with guidelines that will be followed for curriculum that will say curriculum that goes into classrooms will not have racism taught or divisive policies that say one person is better than another based on their race, sex, or color. That's what the bill specifically says. And Joe, go ahead.
Your administration's taken the position that you didn't need fresh or new authorization from the legislature to start expending the child care stabilization funds. So I'm just curious why you decided to wait until the Senate passed the resolution yesterday.
Well, we waited to send out the daycare grants because the Appropriations Committee asked us to, and we want to work with the legislators. Back months ago, I started having meetings with legislators, having telephone town halls, going to their communities, having coffee, lunch with them, talking about what their priorities were. Before I ever put my budget together, I knew we were going to have a lot of federal dollars. I knew we had a big increase in our sales tax revenue. And I knew that when there's a lot of money, there can be a lot of different ideas and projects that should be funded with those dollars, and wanted to have their feedback. I would say that virtually everything that was in my budget was something legislators asked me to put in my budget, including daycare grants. The one thing that came up over and over and over again is our daycares need help and they need it right away. We had $100 million that was sent to social services of federal dollars that we had federal authority to spend based on last year's general budget. One of the things that would be helpful is if everybody remembers, and if it's in your reporting, that for state revenue dollars, the Appropriations Committee appropriates it, tells us how to spend it. For federal dollars, they give us the authority to spend it. It's not specific, it's not tied to a specific program or project. They tell us what area it should be spent, and specific to these ARPA dollars, we have Treasury guidance that tells us how we have to spend it. And if we don't spend it appropriately, then we get audited and we have to repay it. So on these phone calls, in these meetings, they all said, get help to daycares as soon as possible. So we had $32 million that we ran a grant application program on. We're ready to send the checks out. We were keeping legislators informed on, and some appropriators were confused as to where those dollars came from and the authority they'd already given us on them. There's still over $60 million that this legislature will decide how they want to work with daycares, to expand them, to partner with businesses to get more capacity out there. This $32 million is just to stabilize the current daycares, keep them open, keep them supporting our workforce. There's still going to be tens of millions of dollars during this legislative session that those legislators will have the chance to specifically direct on where they go.
You said you wanted to work or get the input of the legislature. The House has two bills today related to this on their calendar. So why
Well,
not
based
wait for
on
them?
decades of how this legislature works and how budgeting works, those bills aren't necessary. I already have the authority. They gave me the authority last year in last year's budget to do this program. If they want to pursue those bills, they can. But I think the sense of the Senate with their 35-0 vote yesterday is that the Senate believes they already gave us this authority to send out these checks as well.
But that resolution wasn't necessary either, though.
No, but I think they wanted to send a clear message that they agreed with me that I already had the authority. There's many in the House that agree as well. I think that's why you saw it didn't get calendared, and why there was some debate even among House members on if they should be debating this topic. And we'll see what happens today. I know that I think there's universal agreement among legislators that they want to help daycares, and they want to. The question is over, if they think that they should have specifically given their stamp of approval. What a lot of the House members don't necessarily know, because they're not on the Appropriations Committee, is that they do appropriate state dollars, but they gave us federal authority, spending authority in last year's budget. Austin.
Yes, ma'am. Those daycare grant dollars are going out to daycares that are licensed with the state or have a state license. You've really predicated your administration around cutting red tape. And there are obviously a lot of daycares that are either completely unlicensed or licensed through cities. Is there going to be more relief coming for those daycares that aren't licensed through the state, or what's kind of maybe the next step for those daycares specifically?
Well, there's an accountability for safety issues as well that we have at the state level. So the reason there's registered daycares is because if something happens in one of those daycares, then the state has some oversight there that they're responsible for. So that's why the grants are open to them. We are streamlining how we register daycares. And these grants are to help, we think, get a lot more of them registered because some of those requirements can be building adjustments that need to be made or sprinkler systems or different things that may cost them money. So that's some of the ideas that we're pursuing to help a lot more daycares get licensed with the state so we can have safe daycare centers and have more of them available in some of our communities.
Governor?
Yes.
Bob Mercer, K-12 News. This morning, the House Health Committee had a bill up about ivermectin and whether or not practitioners should be able to dispense it without a prescription. Your administration didn't take a position on it, at least not at the committee hearing. What is your position on that?
Well, ivermectin is a drug that typically requires a prescription. What most people don't know is there's quite a few, I think 1 out of 4 prescriptions in this country are prescribed for a different use than what the FDA approved them for. And so people are questioning if ivermectin can be used for the treatment of different viruses, including COVID. I believe it is a medical drug that went through the FDA approval process. It requires a prescription, and I've never questioned the fact that that prescription could be necessary.
As a former legislator and now governor, how would you describe South Dakota Right to Life's influence in the Capitol when it comes to abortion legislation?
Oh, I think South Dakota Right to Life for years has been a warrior for protecting unborn lives, and have always appreciated the integrity they brought to every discussion. The challenge this year is that we had a bill that had to deal with protecting life, and we didn't have a debate on it. I don't necessarily place the blame on South Dakota Right to Life. I just wish that in South Dakota, what I've always been proud of is that we debate every bill and we have an open policy discussion on what that legislation is and if it should be passed or not. That didn't happen last week.
Go ahead, Lee.
Go.
I was going to follow up on or not on that, but like a different question. Sure. Late last year or middle of last year, there was reporting about the Pandora Papers and the trust industry in South Dakota, including massive sugar plantation operation that mowed down some houses in order to expand.
Okay.
Money being placed in South Dakota in a South Dakota trust. Should a bill have been brought to maybe look at those kind of bad actors, or what are your thoughts on that lack of legislation this year?
Well, we have a governor's trust task force that brings forward recommendations to updates to the industry. It's an important industry in the state of South Dakota. If they chose not to recommend changes to some of those laws, and if legislators chose not to bring any bills, I don't know necessarily if there was anything to debate. Anything else?
Yeah, Governor.
No, that's good.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Earlier this week, your Secretary of Education said during a hearing on a related bill that the Department of Education is going to conduct a study of the gaps or the
Of
needs
gaps?
of gaps that are needs
Okay.
for preschool.
Okay.
Can you tell me more about that?
Well, I think that we all know that there are some areas of the state that don't have access to preschool and early childhood education. The fact of the matter is that we've got quite a few kids in this state that start kindergarten unprepared. I have teachers every day telling me the challenges they have when kids come in and they don't know how to hold a pen or a pencil or a color. They don't know how to cut. Some of them aren't even potty trained when they're showing up for kindergarten. Early childhood education, preschool, sometimes gives them a bit of structure that they're not getting at home. And so I think studying that and having facts when we talk about that issue is incredibly important at the state level. Joe?
On your veto, didn't that idea of raising that cap come from your administration a couple years ago?
I don't know. I don't think so.
$600, well, I think it was a lower level, but it was beyond $100. Is there a threshold beyond $100 that you would be satisfied with?
I think the $100 is appropriate. I don't remember the discussion a couple years ago, but I'd like it to remain at $100.
Governor, over the course of maybe the last week or two, a lot of states on the East Coast, historically Democrat-run states, have begun to drop mask mandates, eliminate capacity in buildings related to COVID, drop mask mandates for schools. I just want to get your thoughts on that. And, obviously South Dakota's had not very many of those restrictions. Just your reaction to some of those changes.
I think it's been interesting to see other states, consistently their leadership is not making decisions based on science. And we've seen that for quite some time. Thankfully, in South Dakota, we continue to look at the data, give information to the people in the state of where the COVID is and the virus in the state, and keep them informed. But it's been used as a political weapon in other states. And I'm thankful that some of these leaders are finally waking up and recognizing that they don't have the authority to impose these mandates on their people. Joe is wanting to ask another question.
If you're going to allow me.
Sure.
Last week, we talked a lot about your relationship with the Speaker of the House. And I'm curious if you've spoken with him since then, and sort of if anything is being done to sort of repair that relationship.
I have spoken with him. We had lunch in this room yesterday with all the leadership team working on a path forward. I'm grateful for it. Bob?
Do you have any comment on the federal judge's decision regarding the medical abortion?
Yeah, I think it was interesting to hear her argument. It was more about making it an abortion issue, which clearly in this telemedicine abortion order which we put forward, it's about women's health. It is 4 times more likely a woman will end up in the emergency room from utilizing and accessing abortion through this manner. And that is why we put it forward, is to protect women's health and make sure that they are medically supervised. The federal judge chose to make it about something else, and that's disappointing. We will appeal.
And we'll give Austin.
This is Ariel.
Ariel, go ahead.
Sure. So one of the points that they made is that these two cocktail, the 2-drug cocktail, that's also used for other medical issues, including miscarriage management, when you're starting a miscarriage and kind of need help to complete it. And the risk of bleeding in that procedure is actually more than an abortion. So why aren't you regulating the medication in that and other procedures, and just when it comes to abortion?
I would believe that most of those situations you're referencing do have medical supervision. In the instance of telemedicine abortions, someone can make a phone call, get online, order the drugs to be sent to their home, and there is no medical supervision. That's what makes it so dangerous. And that kind of access opens it up to our young women to be in their bathrooms or locker rooms alone undergoing this procedure with no doctor or physician at any all tied to the responsibility of whatever the consequences may be.
So,
Stephen?
right now,
This lawsuit
since
wasn't
that,
about
Sorry,
that.
Ariel, I'm going to Stephen in the room.
so right now, since that law was enjoined, are you saying that women can access the abortion pills through telemedicine consultation in South Dakota?
I believe they can. We're appealing that decision, though. I'll find out for sure, but I'm pretty certain they can.
Last question to Austin.
Who do you got winning the Super Bowl, Governor?
Oh, well, I'm such an expert on these things. I'm going to go with the Rams. I think they are the clear favorites, so it's probably not too risky to choose them, although the Bengals are inspirational. Yeah. I'm working on it. We have a high need still for wonderful people in the state to fill law enforcement positions. Our Department of Corrections is always looking for outstanding people to help. So we'd love it if those law enforcement officers out in LA decided they wanted to come enjoy a little freedom.
What about you, Larry? Who do you got winning the Super Bowl?
I'm going to keep my powder dry till the third quarter and then pick.
The lieutenant governor is always the wisest man in the room. Thank you, everybody.